it was cool. When it comes to feelings, food, we don't, especially with dietetics, we don't eat just because of hunger. So, you have to be really prepared to embrace all the different motivations that people bring to eating, which very often are feelings based. So if you're not equipped to jump in the pool and sit around in the feeling water, then you're kind of in the wrong line of work.
Welcome to Personalize by Vitamin Lab, the show where we dive deep into the world of personalization in healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. David Dizer. Please remember that the following discussion is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Speak with your healthcare practitioner first before integrating anything that you learned today. Join us as we explore the remarkable stories, breakthroughs, and possibilities that come with the pursuit of personalized healthcare. Welcome back to Personalize by Vitamin Lab. I'm your host, Dr. David Dizer. Today on the show, I spoke with Eve Persak, nutritional counselor, consultant, speaker, and writer. Eve has had an outstanding career so far. She has a Bachelor of Science in Nutritional Science from Pepperdine, a Master of Science in Human Nutrition from California State University. She's volunteered globally working with malnourished children in Africa. She's worked institutionally at a children's hospital in Southern California in both oncology and intensive care. And she's also worked in corporate wellness internationally. Now Eve works remotely with people from all over the world, helping them optimize their nutrition to suit the best possible health outcomes. She has a rational, empathetic, and inclusive approach to eating that really resonates with me, and I think is the definition of personalization in health programming. Please enjoy our episode with Eve Persak. Welcome back to Personalize. I'm here with Eve Persak. Hi, Eve. How are you today?
I'm good, David. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks so much for being on the show. You have a very cool career. I say this at the start of every episode because I only get a chance to interview really cool people, but your career is awesome. My goodness, you've been traveling all over the place, doing different types of work in nutrition. I'd love to hear about your career so far as a summary from you. What has it been like? Where did you start and how has it evolved over time?
If someone were to have asked me, as I was just getting started, what my career would look like, I could never have forecasted how this has unfolded. But yeah, it's been kind of like a circuitous and checkered journey. So I did my education in Southern California in nutrition. I think at the outset, I thought that I wanted to do sports medicine because I was really involved as an athlete. But after having taken my first nutrition course, it was kind of like that love at first sight or, love at first experience. I think it was just really fascinating to me to see like how the things that we eat can just turn into something so different and behave in certain ways and encourage our body to do different things. So that was just fascinating to me. And when I finished my undergraduate degree, very often with nutrition, you transition into an internship, and it's a fairly competitive process. And it was in Southern California where I was doing that. And I was really fortunate to be placed with an internship. And one would think that, after having kind of accomplished that you'd be really excited. And for some reason, it didn't feel right. And in hindsight, when I look at that, I think part of that was because I did my undergraduate education at Pepperdine, which is in Malibu, California, which is obviously a very affluent area. And having grown up in, my family, I grew up in the Midwest, and we were really lucky to always have food on the table. And I kind of just felt like there were some missing pieces. Not that you need to travel far to observe malnutrition. It happens everywhere in America. But I kind of just felt that I was going into a field and, our goal as dietitians is to obviously resolve malnutrition and then to optimize it. But I just felt like I had never really observed malnutrition. And so I was really lucky. My supervisor who oversaw the nutrition program at Pepperdine, I reached out to her and said, can you chat? And I said, I don't feel right about accepting this internship, which is a real, I guess, kind of a faux pas, only because, these academic institutions want very much to have strong statistics about the
Mm.
placement of their graduates into these programs. And so I felt very guilty for suggesting that I might not accept this. And she was so supportive and just said, listen, you need to do what feels right for you right now. Don't worry about Pepperdine. Worry about Eve. And she said, talk to me. What are you thinking about doing? And I said to her, I think I'm going to go to Africa. And I laugh so hard at this right now because I really have no idea where that came from. And at that time, it was in the, you're revealing a bit of my
That's
age
okay.
here, but at that time, it was in, early 2000. And, and so it wasn't really something that many people were doing. And I had absolutely no connections in Africa whatsoever. And so I did start my graduate work because I thought, no matter what, I know I want to continue my education here, but let's just see what's possible. And lo and behold, I connected with a very small charitable organization in the bush in Zambia. And I was able to, they weren't accepting any volunteers, but I was able to get the, Polish nun who was running this orphanage. Somehow I was able to connect with her. I must have been super tenacious because,
For sure.
email was hard for her to get. And I have no
Right.
idea what I was up to, but I was doing some good detective work. And when I reached out to her and said, listen, I understand you're not volunteers, but if you're happy to take any at any point, please let me know. And she just said, can you come in January? And
Mm.
that
Wow.
was, only a month or so away. I'd never been to Africa. I was going to the bush, so clearly I had to equip myself appropriately and vaccinate and everything. But I was on a plane, and I was there for probably half the year and loved it. And while I was in Africa, it was actually very difficult to get any kind of email dialogue because we were so in such a remote area. But every week or two, we would get on the back of this truck that would take everyone from this area into, downtown Lusaka, which is the capital of Zambia. And I would be able to get onto an internet cafe and just check my emails. And while I was there, one of my teachers, who was also the supervisor, said, listen, I think I have an internship when you come back for you. And she was at a conference and sat next to someone, and they struck up conversation. And it was with the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And
Mm.
I think she must have said, I have someone who's working in an orphanage in pediatric nutrition, and she's coming back. And, we're not quite sure yet, but I was able to pull it together so that when I came back, I slipped right into this amazing internship that's with University in Southern California and the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And it's a 2-year program that requires a concurrent master's degree. So I got into that. And then after that, the Children's Hospital swooped me up and said, listen, we'd like to kind of bring you in. And then I had a really lovely stretch of time with the Children's Hospital, which was just the most insane, beautiful educational experience. And it was perfect preface to any kind of professional path that I had. I mean, I worked with a large team of dietitians who, I'll get almost choked up talking about them. They're the most gifted, generous women who taught me so much. And I worked with some just incredible doctors. I was in GI and in hematology and oncology and infectious disease and intensive care. So I got to see it all over several years. And then out of the blue, I got an email from a friend that said, listen, there's this job open, and it was a company, it was a global hospitality company. And this was done around 2010. And this global hospitality company was looking for a nutritionist to come out and open a flagship wellness center in Southeast Asia.
Oh my goodness.
And I was so in my own spin. I was working and doing triathlons, have my own little apartment, my friends, and no plans of changing in any way, shape, or form. And so I didn't really even read the email, but I went to a ladies' night, and my friend who sent me the email said, "How about that email?" And I said, "What email?" To which she was kind of a little bit upset. And she's like,
For
"Oh,
sure.
cool, you're not even reading my email." But she described kind of what it was, and my first response was, I could never do that. And it was
Mm,
almost like one of those scenes that you see in like a sitcom where like everything goes silent, and everyone at
mm,
the table kind of looked at me, and all of my wonderful girlfriends said, "We don't ever want to hear you say I could never do anything." And they kind of said, "You're not watering your plants, you're single, you're, like,
mm,
take a year, go do this." And so I said, okay, that night I got home, opened the email, reached out to the contact and said, "Can you tell me a little bit more?" And to make a single question story less wordy, as I've already done. Um, about a few months later, I was on a plane once again,
wow.
sold everything, um, gave my car to my parents, like really minimalist style, and went to Asia sight unseen as well. And had only signed a 1 year contract, so I really only intended to be there for a year. And then, 3, 4 years later, I was still working with this brand, and we had done quite a lot. And I said to the owner of the brand, another amazing woman, and I just said, "Listen, because they had invited me to continue on, and I said, "Listen, we've done some incredible things, but I use some certifications that I'm not using, and I feel like, I'd like to kind of capitalize on my expertise." And she said, "Well," and I said, "I'd love to continue to work together, but in an independent capacity." To which she kind of handed me all of the brands within her ownership and said, "Listen, we'd like for you to kind of advise and look over these brands." And then I went freelance. And in the beginning, most of my contracts were Asia based. And then over time, they became a little bit more international. So it just became a lot of travel. And I kept the wellness center that I worked at was in Bali.
Hmm.
And so I kept Bali as my base just because anyone who has lived there, it's not what anyone thinks it is when you kind of see the Instagram posts, but when you've
Hmm.
lived there for, at that time, probably 6 or, at that time, no, it would have been more 4 years, and you've lived as an expatriate, a working expatriate, the people are some of the most gorgeous souls you could ever. And it's just a
Mm,
really relaxed place to live. There's just people are so slow to anger, and everything kind of flows. So as my work was becoming very intensive, it was really beautiful to be able to come back to that as an exhale to kind of
mm.
punctuate each of the trips. And I continued to do that until just this past year. So it was 12 years
Wow. Oh
in
my
Asia,
gosh.
and
You
I'm fresh off the boat from Asia, back in America now, and I'm trying to figure out
totally.
where I'll situate here, but we'll see.
Well, welcome back. We're going to benefit from your experience, that's for sure. As a young grad, I remember getting a call for a very cushy job, which of course I took, and I'm still sitting in the same clinic seat
Oh,
that I've been working in since day one. But I often think about journeys like yours where you have had this, like you mentioned, the tenacity to create experiences for yourself. You had an opportunity to jump right into what was kind of planned for you, and you took a right turn. How do you
yeah.
feel about the creation of personal experiences for practitioners in healthcare? Like someone, for example, who's just graduating, who maybe has been offered something that, maybe they're 26 and they've been offered something that kind of just makes sense to evolve for evolution in life, but doesn't make sense for their personal evolution. It sounds like you got a ton of benefit out of creating this experience. What would you suggest for a person who's just graduating?
Yeah, as I said, when I look back and I think about, the eve of, undergraduate school, I actually have no idea where I found the gumption to
Right.
do what I did, because, I think I was just raised to be a good girl and to follow the right steps. But the only thing I can say is that it just felt wrong, like it on a visceral level. And I, I couldn't ignore that it literally made me feel nauseous. So I just thought, okay, clearly something is not right here. And so I think the two bits of advice that I could possibly share would be, if there is any inkling that you have that something isn't a good fit, just pause. You don't often, we think we need to make the decision right away. Get really curious about the feelings that are coming up, because they are indicators that some of it might just be fear of the unknown and taking the next step. And if that's the case, then press on, get out there and do it. But if it's something that feels like, no, this isn't the right move for me, then you really have to honor it. And I can't really take full credit for creating the experiences, because I guess with the Africa one, I can, only because I was, snooping around on the internet and, had no idea what I was going to find. But I really have to be grateful for certain people that gave me permission when I wasn't sure I could give permission to myself. And also for people who, even with, I have a private practice, which is more counseling, et cetera, but I do have a corporate consultancy. And, either way, certain opportunities arrive for us at different times. And it's very easy to say no, which again was my first instinct, in particular when I was, receiving this invitation to just apply for this role in Asia. And had I been left to my own devices, I would have declined. I wouldn't even have entertained it. So I can't really take credit, but I think it would just be to say, to pay attention to your gut instincts, and then also to just be open to the invite, because thereafter, after having had that experience that was so fruitful, I just became, somebody who was so much more open to invitations. That comes with trade-offs too, because, as you mature in your profession, you do have to become a little bit more discerning. You find that, like, you actually don't want to say yes to everything. Not only because you have a certain amount of bandwidth, but also because you do have to do due diligence and make sure it feels good when you run it through your own personal filter. But, I think I would also just suggest that, I think this is probably a little bit more on the part of the educational institutions, that it would really behoove a lot of these educational institutions to intermittently bring certain individuals in who are doing things that are very outside the box or perhaps not expected, because you can, in any profession, find yourself on this train and you remember getting on, but you kind of, after a while, don't remember why or what, And I think with respect to your experience, there is this beautiful thing. It's almost kind of like the people who meet, they marry their college sweetheart or something, in some ways, if you end up finding a really phenomenal opportunity that fits like a glove and allows you to be playful and creative and grow in your shoes, then sometimes it's, don't mess with a good thing.
Completely. I'm trying to teach this way of thinking to my kids. I've got 3 young kids, and teaching them to listen to their gut, but also to be patient, is not the easiest thing. Did your parents instill this in you? How did you get this sort of vibe?
No, actually, I was a very impatient person. I think, yeah, and I don't know. I think my family definitely taught me about what's right and wrong. And I think they definitely instilled in me a really strong work ethic and tenacity, where if you want something, it's your job to go get it and to make it happen. But I think I just have big feelings. And I think that moving forward, I've had the privilege of kind of learning ways to get quiet and get curious about what those mean for me.
What do you think of endurance training as a way of building positive self-talk
Oh,
and
yeah.
optimizing for reflection, like spending time alone, but in difficult under difficult terrain, under difficult conditions. How do you feel about that as a meditative technique?
Well, I definitely feel it's meditative. There's actually a really incredible book, and the name of the author fails me, but it's what I think about when I'm running or something along those lines. It's by a Japanese author, and it's fascinating because any runner can appreciate it. I think he was writing it for everyone, but I actually found endurance sport because it was the only way I could find some peace and quiet.
Mm.
I grew up with a family of three brothers, and it was loud, and I was always a morning person. So it was kind of this way for me to find a space in the day that where there was peace. And I started kind of doing, running because I had always been involved in sport, but I found that in high school, regrettably, as can happen, they made a movie. It's probably several movies after it, but the girls can be a little bit sassy and catty. And I found that things that I loved about sports were kind of getting lost in a lot of the gossipy
Mm.
things. And so I kind of said that I kind of know, I've always learned to kind of be a little bit of like the Switzerland, because of my three brothers, clearly.
Mhm.
So I always kind of took the peacemaker approach, and I thought the best way to make peace here might be to exit stage left. And so I had signed up for my first 5K, and I thought it was fun. And then I signed up for a marathon. So I did my first marathon when I was 16,
Oh my
and I would do
goodness.
my long runs like before school. And I still think back at those runs as being like so fond. I can remember the paths that I was on. I can still see all the houses in the neighborhoods and the community in which I grew up. And it definitely does almost accidentally get you in very close touch with your breath.
Mm.
So I think there's definitely that. I think it's also very hard to find solitude for all of us nowadays. And I think I have always been a little bit, I'm doing so much talking today that you wouldn't think that I'm an introvert, but I certainly am. And so I found that it was a way for me to just really honor my introversion. I also think outside of just a meditative practice, I do think that it almost has elements of yoga in it, where yoga is very, not that yoga isn't meditation. I know that that's obviously a staple with yoga, but, with yoga, it's very much about being comfortable with discomfort. And so I think with endurance sport, it's very useful throughout the rest of your life in that when things get difficult, you don't just abort mission,
Mm.
and you don't whine about it. You kind of find a way to move through it and find a way to tap into reserves that most of the time we don't know we have. So
Definitely.
I appreciate that aspect of the endurance
And
sport.
then maybe you challenge yourself professionally in ways that are going to be difficult for anyone. And one of those ways that come up for me, an experience I've never had, is really working with children. And I'd love to hear about
So hard.
the challenges and what you learned from that experience that really kind of shaped who you are as a dietitian today.
You know, Working with children, it takes a really special person to work with children. And I say that not celebrating myself, but celebrating the women who I met who who were and are continuing to spend all of their time. And it's it's challenging work. It's really rough. I spent the lion's share of my time in hematology and oncology. So that was really challenging in that, you know, chemotherapy is no walk in the park for anyone. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have some of these little ones that were some of them diagnosed in utero, they just came
Mm-hmm.
out with cancer. I wish I could say that I was really tough and that I was able to kind of move through it with a certain amount of grace. But my goodness, the amount of times I cried. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
in the children's hospital there, the dietitians were our working unit was on the basement floor at the time when I started. And so we would be paged when pagers were happening. Again, I'm dating myself. But we would, just we would run up, to the different floors, to the units to which we were called. And I can just remember, I mean, I really think I christened the stairwell with more tiers. And I would always take the stairs because it gave me a little bit of privacy, so that if I needed a moment, I could get it. But very often you would see other practitioners and they would just kind of pat you on the shoulder and be like, you know, just, it's all right. And you kind of just, or people just kind of give you a look, but definitely challenging on the heart. But I think what I also observed was at the Children's Hospital, they did such a extraordinary job of creating care team for these patients. And so there was a designated care coordinator that each child had assigned to them, that was responsible for taking all of these different arms of the multidisciplinary team and making sure that we were on the same page, that we were all working very fluidly together. And also, you weren't treating the patient, you were treating the patient and every member of the family that was kind of enveloping them, or whoever the caregivers were. And so you very quickly learned that there was no isolated patient, that it was in fact a village that was working in an ecosystem that was working on behalf of the patient. And so, when, to kind of dovetail on just even the name of the podcast, personalized, it's that, as a clinician, I had the responsibility of really making sure that I was tending to all the different diagnostics that this little one may be juggling, but also all of the different team members and all of their preferences for how their nutritional care was carried out. And that would vary from practitioner to practitioner, from discipline to discipline. Certain surgeons liked it one way and others liked it another way. And then you have these families who are so diverse. That's one thing that's great about Los Angeles, is that it's such a melting pot. And so there's no other way than to just drop everything and, just kind of melt into whatever this child needs, you need to be. And you need to change your communication to suit your colleagues, to suit the family, to suit the child. And so from very early on, I don't really know any other way to do it. I don't know how. But with respect to it being challenging, I can only say that, I told myself that when I stopped crying, it would be the day that I quit. And fortunately, I'm not short on tears. So that never happened. And the opportunity fell in my lap to locate before that happened. But there are a lot of practitioners who are working in this area. And as somebody who's had the real joy of spending some time there, they are just salt of the earth. There's
Absolutely.
These people who work with kids and their families are just incredible.
Vitamin Lab revolutionizes personalized supplements, empowering health practitioners to create tailored supplement formulations that address each patient's unique needs. Bring personalized health to your practice and choose from over 200 professional-grade ingredients to create vitamin formulas that improve patient adherence and result in tangible outcomes. All ingredients are sourced from the world's most trusted suppliers, and Vitamin Lab provides hands-on support to help you formulate and launch personalization to your patients. Say hello to a new era of personalized supplement solutions. Go to getvitaminlab.com/personalized to save $100 off your first formula.
Thank you for sharing. My goodness, I can't imagine that experience. It must have been tough.
It was cool.
It was cool? Yeah.
It was cool. When it comes to feelings, food, we don't, especially with dietetics, we don't eat just because of hunger.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you have to be really prepared to embrace all the different motivations that people bring to eating, which very often are feelings based. So if you're not equipped to kind of jump in the pool and swim around in the feeling water, then you're kind of in the wrong line of work.
Definitely.
It all worked out.
Well, you bring up a good point there. Every time I talk to nutritionists and dietitians, I like to ask about how they personalize their behavioral change. So behavioral change, big challenge, of course, in anything in life, but especially in eating, with respect to eating. When you're asked to eat something different or in a different way, a lot of roadblocks can come up for anyone.
Oh, yeah.
Even the person who is the most disciplined, for example. can have a difficulty making change. How do you personalize your behavioral change? Maybe questions you ask or steps that you take?
Yeah, I think, behavioral change is tricky. And I think the first thing we have to do is assess the readiness for that change. Because I think, some of my, some of the referrals that I receive are from individuals who've recently been diagnosed with something. And then I do have a lot of people who reach out because they themselves are ready and it's time. So, you kind of have to at first assess, where are they? And also, where are they on the spectrum of like, I'm ready to do, some clients will say, tell me what you need me to do and I'll do it.
Yeah, exactly what you tell me.
Exactly. And when that happens, you say, okay, that's great, but is this sustainable? Obviously, you never want to discount anyone's enthusiasm. But I think we also need to like manage expectations and say, listen, I know that you're willing to do anything for a short period of time, but we need to make sure it's something that you're willing to do for the long haul. I also think it's about letting people know that, okay, some changes need to be made. I gather as much intel as I can about that person. The intake forms that I have are quite extensive, and I really spend extra time to get to know my clients. And I think when I understand what's motivating them, what their goals are, what their fears are, etc., then it allows me to kind of gauge which changes can we make that would be the least disruptive to their current lifestyle. And then to say which changes are going to be the ones that are going to give us the greatest return on their investment. Because once they start to see any degree of improvement, that is so encouraging and it kind of builds upon itself. So you get that buy-in and then they're motivated to continue on, or they're motivated to preserve whatever progress they've made. But I also think a lot of it is just, let's make a deal. I will very much say, okay, here's where we are and here's where we want to be. We have a couple things that we need to address. Which one is, I love to be a multitasker, but sometimes it's not always possible. Sometimes you get one diagnosis that is completely opposite than the other diagnoses, and you have to kind of do a little bit of CSI to figure out how to make a meal. But if you have the luxury of choosing, then we can say, okay, what are the things that are most relevant or most time sensitive or urgent? But then when it comes to creating, kind of meals or a meal plan, if you will, for someone, it's a shared experience. I've never provided the same meal plan twice in my life, ever. And I never will. And I think it's something that we do together. A lot of times I'll start by saying, what are you doing now? And then we kind of talk through, okay, here are the adjustments that we can make: breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, meal platter. And we'll talk about all of them and we'll say which ones feel doable. And some people, it allows them to have a sense of say or agency. It's like, no problem, chocolate will be there. And, just making room for, I never call them cheat meals, but I always say, let's find some pleasure, let's build it in. And we do it by degrees. So if someone's really hesitant and is just overwhelmed, then we start super small. If someone is, very motivated, then we go whole hog. I think in many ways, I allow the patient or the client to kind of guide me and give me the cues. And then we kind of dance from there.
That's the best part about individualized care, is to be a really good team member, I think. To be able to be there for someone and to be able to help them on the fly make changes that are going to have a significant impact, but also sort of resonate with them, because maybe it wasn't exactly their idea, but they were promoting it. There was, okay, I think this is the one for me. What do you think about that? And then fine tuning it. I like that. You mentioned priorities there. What's your ideal client currently? What's the main condition you see, or the main person you see, if there is one in your current practice?
There isn't. Oh my gosh, no. My practice is all over the shop, globally, diagnostically, culturally. It's yes. So I worked internationally for a very long time. I mean, my private practice, I have people from Lebanon, from Dubai, from Germany, from the Netherlands, from,
Wow, cool.
every Brunei, Thailand, China, Singapore, Indonesia, Australia. Everyone is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I never advertised my practice. So all of my practice is all referrals. So it's kind of this really sweet feeling where everyone's found me because somebody else was worried about somebody else. And I have lots of friends and colleagues and brothers and sisters and moms and dads and neighbors. And so
Cool.
there's never more than a degree or two of separation. But because I have worked in pediatrics and adult, and I also partner with clinicians all over the world, who are in gastroenterology, cardiology, dermatology, pediatrics, allergy. So I'm very cognizant that, like, with certain conditions, if it's really high level, then I would be more than comfortable taking it to somebody who works exclusively with a certain clientele. But before now, I haven't really experienced much of that. So I find I get bored a little bit easily. So I find that having that patient diversity along those lines is really helpful. And I also find that it makes my work more challenging, but also more fruitful. So, if I have someone who's, like a Singaporean woman who's just relocated to the Netherlands, and she's trying to figure out, she's just been diagnosed with some reproductive issues, and we're trying to make it work for her and find resources. And so it feels very much like, again, I'm probably dating myself, but like MacGyver, or, where you're like just grabbing at things and, how do we make this work? And where can we find this for you? And I'm on all kinds of international websites doing this, that, and the other thing. But when it comes together and when that patient improves, it's so rewarding. Like, it's so fun. So with respect to what area, I'm so open. I'm so open. And I also find, though, too, that that's important because it's very rare that we meet someone with one issue. I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but if I ever had someone that had like just reflux or, just high cholesterol, I would, every once in a while it happens, but most of the time it's several things. So having had the good fortune of spending time in different areas, I feel that having some literacy or some fluency in the full scope allows you to catch things. And also, I myself am I love referrals. I'll find a GI thing and I'll send it to some GI practitioners. So I'm just as much as I'm fortunate to inherit somebody else's patient, I'm also really just grateful to have a network internationally that I can say, okay, here. So I think we all need to work collectively.
Definitely. Fully agree. On the priority side of things nutritionally, I have some questions about some things that practitioners might be interested in. So most of our viewership is practitioners in integrative care in some way or another. Yeah. And we never get a chance to do a supermarket walkthrough. We never get a chance to like go and look at someone's pantry in their home. And I know you've had experience with both of those things. I'd love to hear just how we could explain what a walkthrough might look like, what a pantry walkthrough or a supermarket walkthrough might look like. What would be the priorities that are top of mind for you? Forget the condition. This is just for general wellness. What should we be telling people in these two scenarios?
Yeah, that's a great question, but also a little bit of a slippery one, because in my experience, even some of the healthiest foods can be problematic for certain people who have certain conditions. So, very often I'll have people who say to me, what's your food philosophy? Or, what's your approach? And I am always kind of stumped by the question because firstly, I don't know if they're asking me what my approach is to my patients, in which case it's different every time. And if they're asking me about what I'm espousing, based on for everyone to eat, firstly, what would work for me might not work for you. So, my practice has never been about me. It's always been about the other person. I just need to drop myself completely, in fact, and be whatever that person needs me to be. And whatever my preferences are for that person really need to die, because it really just needs to be what's in their best interest and what matches their culture and their own preferences, and make it work. But when we're going through, a pantry, I think very often I always, I used to do, and I don't do it as much now, but I do it more via telehealth, like a kind of like a kitchen edit. And the pantry is, I think if we rely too much on the pantry, then we're missing some of the things that belong in the refrigerator, the fresher foods that I think a lot of people would benefit from consuming more of. I think for the most part, I'm usually looking for products that have been as minimally touched by man or machine. And I think that's probably not too indifferent from what most people are suggesting. I don't necessarily think that anyone needs to be exclusively plant-based, just because I have clients who, are allergic to legumes, all legumes. They can't do legumes or whole grains or nuts or seeds based on their allergies. So to put them on a plant-based diet, they would not have much, to create a nutritionally complete meal. I think we've kind of slipped into a culture where we're so busy. And so whatever is nearby and convenient can be what we end up eating, whether or not it's the most attractive thing, or sometimes it is the most attractive thing. We're also, in a food environment where certain foods have been created to be so hyper palatable and addictive that it can really be such a challenge to step over that magnetism. So I think a lot of it is just trying to focus on the natural bits, and also to do that in waves. Yeah. So, I think certain people, to say, we're just going to be eating only whole foods, they would say, I beg your pardon. And some people don't have ready access, to that. So I think it's just about kind of saying, okay, can we do phase one? And then we'll do phase two, and kind of taking it one step at a time. But usually I'm just trying to avoid a lot of the artificial things, a lot of the synthetic ingredients, and a lot of the things that are ultra processed.
I'm all about that. I see it as being two categories, the way that you explained it. And I think these categories would be really helpful for me to this is something I could actually implement today. It's the processed side, and then it's the salt, sugar, fat side that these corporations have decided to make this because you will be hooked. And, typically when I'm discussing this with parents, we're calling it kids food because so much of it is kids food, unfortunately. And I was speaking with someone today, and we were talking about our habits, and I was sharing my habits about picking after the kids and trying not to buy these foods for the kids, but very, very often it's difficult, right? Because of the convenience side.
Well, of course, and for an individual like yourself who's a very busy practitioner, meals can feel a little bit like fire drills. It's and very often, I do a lot of work with picky eating and whatnot. So sometimes it's, you feel like it's shorter to cook, and it's like, if you can just get through a meal where everyone is fed and no longer hungry, and there hasn't been any outburst, and it feels like a triumph, let alone to try to make sure that it's comprehensive and natural. But I think, kids' foods are one thing, but I think it's just as bad with adult food. There are so many health products, and I, air quotes, where, they're plant-based, vegan, gluten-free, but if you read the ingredient label, you really can't recognize most of what's there. And, rather than including real fiber, there's fiber that's been removed and then re-added. And so we've just kind of strayed so far from, a head of broccoli and an apple, that it can get tricky. And very often, there's so much noise in the nutrition field. There wasn't when I first started. And I feel like the water has, some people say it become a little bit muddy. I think it's just, it's certainly, there's just a lot of people in the pool. One thing I think I worry about, though, is that there's a lot of voices, and, some of it has just kind of lent itself more toward fashion rather than fact. And also, people hold so tightly to whatever their beliefs are surrounding food. And in some ways, it's very well intentioned. Some people have a very successful experience with a particular way of eating, and they're so excited about it, and they want everyone to have that same experience. Obviously, neglecting to consider that somebody else's, body, life, etc., is so different from theirs. But it's motivated by something very altruistic. But it can become so challenging for people to try to weed through what's right for them. That's when, if you do have the opportunity to ever have someone come into your home and go through your pantry and your kitchen and tailor it to your preferences, your family, your culture, also what your whole family can eat, but what you have access to, what's best, let alone what's best for your body. But just with healthy eating, sometimes it's super fun. You learn so much about people by their refrigerators, and also just going through the supermarket with them too. I think that is such a cool way to enable. It's very empowering, and it creates an entirely different experience for the person whenever they go through the supermarket thereafter. But there's ways to do that even without being in person. Like, I find a lot of families now rely on meal kits, etc. And so even just walking them through how to select the meals that would be good for them, or how to navigate a menu, because some people can do okay when it's grocery shopping, but when you get to a restaurant, they kind of have this whole deer in headlights moment where they just have no idea what would be right. So I do work quite a bit with like restaurants to create menus that are more intuitive, but I think also it's a really important experience for anybody who does dine away from home to say, okay, if you find yourself at McDonald's, what would be the right choice if there is one. And McDonald's is growing up, so there's always something. And sometimes it's like, we're going on a road trip. We're only going to be stopping at gas stations and fast food places. And so I always think that it's like this whole, lesser of quite a few evils, if you will. But it almost kind of reminds me of those cooking shows where it's like, okay, you've got beef jerky, you've got, how can we make something, how can we make something healthy amidst all of this other stuff? And how it works, you have to get really clever. If you're playful about it and you're kind of curious about it,
it can be done.
It's fun.
How do we help people find what's right for them? Like, let's say we have someone who doesn't know, actually. Like, so we have people in our practice, of course. We've had people on keto have heart attacks. We've had people on carnivore have skin issues and GI issues. And we've had people on plant-based see their muscle mass decline over time. We've seen it all, right? And we've had, in all three cases, people strongly believe that they were doing the right thing for their body. Like, it made sense for them. How should we personalize nutrition? Should we approach this?
I think sometimes too, it's, I will say this too, because I know that you're like an integrative and kind of a functional practitioner. But I think that this is true no matter what discipline you're kind of approaching healthcare with, or whatever lens through which you're viewing it. I think there is real power in diagnostics. So I think what's tricky about that is that sometimes it can get expensive if someone is paying out of pocket. Also, it can be challenging navigating insurance because often there's limitations there. But I do think that it's really important that people just learn about their body. I spend a lot of time going through, in my private practice, I rely on diagnostics heavily, but I also work with practitioners of all disciplines who do as well. And so, sometimes we don't have as much information, but we do the best with the information that we have available. Part of what I found to be most effective is teaching patients and clients what their results mean for them. Because I think very often it can get glossed over. I think it's a vulnerability that we all have as practitioners when there's only a certain number of minutes that you have to spend with each client. I think I tend to spend more time in my private practice because I account for that in my private practice. But I do take the time to talk through every aspect of the results, answer questions, explain what they mean, and translate that so that when that person understands a little bit more about what the numbers mean and what the feedback means from their system. And when they see, if you were to use the example of, the carnivore with elevated, cholesterol levels, if you will, that's there's a whole lot of hot dialogue in this area. But, if you can say, all right, sometimes you're able to say, give me a month of eating outside of carnivore and let's see what happens to your numbers, and we'll go from there. Sometimes it's about saying, okay, I recognize that you appreciate meats, etc. What else can we slip in to offset that? That's not going to complicate things for you and that still feels comfortable. So sometimes it's a little bit of that ideal compromise. But I very often think when somebody understands their system better, also when they have a clinician that can translate that, not just into what the results mean, but what that means for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then they are more open-minded. And I think when you take the time with them to really understand what's motivating their choices and whatnot, you earn a certain amount of buy-in from them, where they're more receptive. And most people really do want to do what's best for them. But sometimes it's about, okay, well, let's just have an experiment. Can you give me a certain amount of time? And I've done the same myself. I've worked with Chinese medicine, Oriental medicine practitioners and Ayurvedic doctors. And I've just said, listen, I'm giving you my body for a month. Show me what you can do, or show me what I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And with Ayurveda, it was lots of like oil and white rice. And I just thought, this is very different from anything that, that I've ever done. I'm like, and everyone who knows me is like, oh, you had refined grains, but I really do think that there's multiple ways to arrive at a certain spot. I think, if I'm sharing a patient with somebody who prefers a different approach to medicine, that, we have to tie in, conventional Ayurvedic, Oriental medicine approaches as well, so as to really be respectful. But a lot of times it's compromise, but I find very often when you earn a bit of that trust, people are very willing to give you a test drive.
You'd be excellent helping someone learn what makes them tick. So what I understand is that you're trying to understand what makes them tick. And then you're helping them learn how their body's responding. You're helping them learn what it feels like.
You have to. And it's never what you think it is. So, I think we misread each other so much, but none of us really knows what anybody else is thinking or feeling. So, I think people, I feel really lucky, and that I think people tend to be they disclose a lot to me. My friends call me the vault and the steel trap, because they just know that anything that you share with me, and it's like Vegas, what happens here stays here. And I also think it's about asking the right questions and just letting people know that you are not just there to, tell them to eat more veggies and
completely
swap their white bread for whole grain or something.
In the spirit of personalization, you tell us, we do this with everyone, tell us something about yourself that most people don't know.
I actually think a lot of people don't know a lot about me, because I really do. I am a very private person. I think I have a tribe of my inner circle, and I am very meticulous and mindful about who I let into that realm of my life, only because so much of my work is others centered. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I am quite chatty, but I actually am really introverted and quite shy. So I think a lot of people just assume that I'm, just making friends on the block or whatever, but not the case at all. And I think also people think that there's a certain amount of perfection in my own eating style, or that most people think that I'm a very good cook. And they just assume that, and I think that that's because so many people who present themselves in the nutrition kind of circle online, they're taking photos of these amazing dishes that they're having for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and everything. And I am always just in awe and in envy, because I joke with my clients. I say, listen, I don't cook, I assemble. I work with chefs. I work with some of the most incredible chefs, but they don't let me wash the vegetables, let alone chop them.
Right.
And I do cook for myself, but it's very simple meals, and I'm traveling so much, so a lot of the stuff is like TCA friendly and or TSA friendly, and it's very on the cuff. So I think a lot of people are surprised by that, but I think in a way they also it resonates with them too. Because, if I do share recipes, which I often do, they're not sexy. They're not. They're simple. And I often say, please, because some of my clients are actually, thank goodness for these cooking shows, because people are so excited about, getting in the kitchen and rolling up their sleeves. But, they're so much more advanced than I am. So I have to just often preface it by saying, please, this is inspo, If your creativity is your own limitation, just take this and run with it. If you've got questions, come back at me and we'll modify the recipe to make it work for you. But yeah, so I don't cook, and I'm actually not introverted at all. And I think most people assume the opposite.
For sure. Well, I love your approach. I think it must resonate with so many people. Where can people find out more about you, Eve? Online? Where should we be looking?
That's so kind of you to ask. I have a website, Persak.com, which I think a lot of people reach out to me, whether it's like practitioners who are looking for somebody to kind of share patients with, or whether it's people who are looking for support. And I think that's a great way to reach me. I'm not really on social media much. I do hop on every once in a while. If somebody reaches out with a message, I usually will reply. But with respect to posting, it's really occasional. Some people find me on LinkedIn. So I think those are probably some of the ways that I kind of fly under the radar in many ways with respect to social media.
Perfect.
And I'm reachable if somebody wants to come find me.
Absolutely. EvePersak.com. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot. I've got some things I'm going to apply later today. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you right back. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a kind invitation, and it's been a real pleasure to chat with you. Thanks for listening so intently and asking such great questions.
We'll talk again soon, okay? Bye.
Thanks for joining us for today's discussion. What about today's podcast resonated with you? Be sure to tag at Dr. David Dizer and at Get Vitamin Lab. If you're learning from and enjoying this podcast, please let us know by subscribing to our YouTube channel and follow the show on Spotify and Apple. And don't forget to leave us a review. It's the best way to support our podcast, and it helps others find us. To learn more or book a demo to explore what personalization could do for your practice, please go to www.getvitaminlab.com/personalized.